Scott, come on up, different folks. Awesome. Thank you, guys. This is some of our senior crew here. Thank you all. I truly appreciate you being here. For those of you who work here in this building and with this team that are behind the cameras, thank you all as well for being here. Some of you I saw brought work with you. You know how these things operate, and you knew you might be sitting a little while, but thanks for coming. Thanks for all the work that is done here. A lot of different cabinets and different employees in this building, but this is specifically to speak to what is happening in the Education and Workforce Development Cabinet at the highest level. And this is really just to speak to the letter that I received yesterday morning from Secretary Heiner, which was his resignation from his position as secretary. And this wasn't something that was a shock or a surprise. In fact, he and I have been talking about this probably for a year, maybe. Actually, almost even before he first accepted the job in the very beginning. There's a lot of things that he has going on other fronts, family, business, and otherwise, that he has wanted to be able to devote more time to. And yet he has such a passion and a love for education and what we're doing here in the Commonwealth. This has been a driving passion of his for decades. And so he was willing to step up and serve. I think it's important to remind folks that he has served for zero compensation. Ever since he took this position as secretary, he has never taken payment from the Commonwealth. And I mention that not for any reason other than the fact that this is truly a labor of love for him. And has been. So I was very sorry I have delayed this day as long as I possibly could by saying, give us a little more time, a little more time. And then as we began to come closer to the reality that this was going to happen, it then was a function of what can we still do? What can you still do? What do you have time and ability to continue to do for the Commonwealth? Because his passion is still there. His ability to do it on a full-time basis is not. And so he said, listen, it's the education side of it that is a passion of mine. And so I said, listen, if slots come open, and we knew they would be this month, for the Board of Education, is that something that you'd be willing to serve in? I was delighted by the fact that he said yes. So as you know from his resignation letter and our announcement, while he's stepping down as Secretary of Education, he will be joining the board as one of 11 members on the Board of Education. So I'm delighted to continue to have that passion and focus on that front. I want to remind people again of a couple of things that have been done. A lot of good work has been done in education and workforce development. And this is what Secretary Heiner has been responsible for. One of them is dual credit. You look at the dual credit scholarships that were implemented just 2 years ago for the first time. We saw year on year an increase by 73% of high school students that were taking advantage of that. And the result of it is that now students can get up to 9 credit hours, both toward high school and toward college, up to 6 in a year, and that has been expanding, so that we've spent millions of dollars helping young people start to pay for college education while they're still in high school. It's been very, very successful. And we've seen this be something that I think is going to continue to roll. Secretary Heiner gets a tremendous amount of credit for helping to put this into play here in Kentucky. The $100 million workforce readiness fund that we put in place. This was a fund where we took $100 million of taxpayer money and bonded that so that those monies could be used for training. And those were competitive. People were allowed to compete for those dollars. But no 100% of any project was going to be funded. And the net result of that is that we did put up $100 million of taxpayer money, but another $145 million of other capital came alongside. So nearly $250 million has been invested in the last 2 years on workforce development. With the net result of that is we now have training programs that are training people, about 29,000 to 30,000 people every year are now being trained out of programs that were developed through this program. An average salary for those folks, and this is conservative, of about $35,000 a year. So you do the math on that, it's about $1 billion impact in terms of the earning potential of people to be able to get trained for jobs that exist. There was also another initiative that Secretary Heiner put in place that he worked on, that he was a champion for, which was to recognize that there are a lot of jobs out there that are unfilled. We have about 160,000, 180,000, depends on how you look at it, plus or minus, of jobs that are unfilled in just a handful of areas. There's about 60 different job designations in 5 fields, fields like IT and fields like healthcare, logistics, advanced manufacturing, construction trades. These fields where we have well over 100,000 jobs just there alone in 60 different fields, you now have the ability in Kentucky, regardless of your age, you could be 50, you could be, 18 years old. If you've never attained an associate's level degree in the past, you can actually get the last dollar paid for by the Commonwealth of Kentucky. If you're interested in pursuing a job in those areas, you can actually apply, get accepted, get any financial aid that you're eligible for, and then have the Commonwealth come along and pay last dollar, knowing that there's a job waiting for you at the end of that effort. And so you get basically an associate level degree. Is it 36 hours, I think? Of 32 hours of training for these types of jobs. We've put millions of dollars into that. We've had thousands of people who've taken advantage of this. We had set up a website, Kentucky, is it Help Wanted KY, helpwantedky.com, that has had over 100,000 hits just since it was set up. And this is a program that went into place in August of last year. So it really hasn't been, it's not even a year, and has already had thousands of people taking part in this. So these are the kind of things that have been going on. The work that he's done in conjunction with this 1115 waiver. The 1115 waiver and the coordination between the health arm and the workforce arm, all of the various entitlement programs, bringing them all together. Workforce is a critical part of that, getting people engaged in their own health outcomes in the communities. This too has been on his plate. So in 2.5 years, it probably feels like 2.5 decades at times. But it has been phenomenal, the amount of good work that has been done and things that have been accomplished, for which I truly am grateful to him. And that's what this is. It's an opportunity to publicly thank him in front of those of you in the media, but also those of you who work with him, and those, many of whom are up here as well. He has been an incredible asset to us. There's a lot of work yet to be done. And this is, again, why he wanted to continue to serve in some respects. We've just gotten increasing numbers of scores back. The NAEP scores have recently just come back. And some of you have perhaps seen that. You probably should take a close look at that. I've talked about a lot of what's going well and what has been worth bragging about. But I'll tell you, some of our testing recently has led us to realize that there's still a lot of work yet to be done. We have about 45% of our young people cannot read or do math at grade level in the 4th grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. We know how critical that is. That's a problem. And it's not just the fact that while on one hand it seems like we're sort of going sideways on that front, what we've seen is we're starting to see a real separation between the quality of testing and the result of the testing for some of our most disadvantaged. And that's concerning. We've actually seen the number of kids who are performing in Kentucky below the basic level, which means below proficiency. That number of disadvantaged kids, poor kids, kids from urban communities, the number of kids overall in Kentucky that are now performing at a basic level or below is increasing. We would expect and hope for the very opposite. So there is yet much work to be done. How is that going to be done? Who's going to lead the charge? Certainly sorry to see Secretary Heiner step down as Cabinet Secretary, but I do want to announce that Don Parkinson is going to be taking on this responsibility as the interim Secretary for Education and Workforce Development. Don, you're familiar with who he is. He's currently our Secretary for Tourism and for the arts here in Kentucky. He's a man with decades of experience on any number of fronts, both in the private sector and the nonprofit sector. Served on, I don't know how many, where are you, Don? So many different boards throughout the years. has been a global executive with responsibilities around the world, has managed thousands of people, including in his role that he now has. He'll be stepping in on an interim basis, which then begs the question, well, who's going to backfill for him? Deputy Secretary Stivers will be stepping up as the interim secretary in that cabinet. So I say this to you again to publicly thank Secretary Heiner. What has been done has been remarkable. I touched on some of these things, but what has yet to be done is still significant. So a lot of work yet to be done. One of the first responsibilities that Don will have in this role is really just to make sure that we have the right people in the right seats on the bus. Some of these positions are vacant. It's the nature of state government. Some of you know this. People come, people go, people move, people retire, people take other positions. We want to make sure we have the right people in the right seats on the bus because there's a lot of work to be done. So that'll be his primary responsibility. We've got great other people that are in place right now, many of whom stand behind me. I won't call them all out individually. These folks continue to be here. Others in this room will continue to be here in these roles. So that's really the purpose of this, is to publicly thank Hal. And Hal, let me have you speak, if you don't mind, as to kind of your thoughts as you transition into a new role here. Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor, for this opportunity for the last 2.5 years to, no disrespect to other cabinets, but the opportunity to work in the cabinet that I think has the greatest influence on on Kentucky's future. You know, I came into this position with really 3 simple goals that wanted to try to accomplish. And I'll talk about goal 2 and 3 first. The second goal was to increase the level of post-secondary success for our high school students, because we know if students are successful in college courses, whether they be academic or technical in high school, the likelihood that they will go on, which they need to go on in this increasingly technical world, the likelihood that they'll go on skyrockets close to 90%. And I think there's been great progress. There's still, we have a great trajectory. We still have a long way to go on that goal, but I'm feeling really good about where we are headed with post-secondary success in high school, especially through dual credit. Goal number 3 was to change, quite frankly, see Kentucky move into the top half of the country in terms of workforce participation rate. When I came into this position, Kentucky was at 47th in the country. The governor talked about that would mean that this morning 165,000 adults that are at home would have had to go to work in order for us to be an average workforce participation state in the country. We've seen some movement there, but most of the work has been foundational. So today we rank 40th in the country in workforce participation rate. A lot of that revolves around education, skills, acquisition. But I'm really excited about a couple of changes there that have taken place. One of the a couple of the most significant, one is that the career centers around the state have changed from their primary focus being services, unemployment benefit services, making sure the check is right, you know, that it's not $5 too much or $5 too short, to employment services, that direct connection of an individual to a job that matches up with their skills so they can best support their family as soon as possible. And the second item there is changing, I'll call it removing the ambiguity of who was responsible for workforce services in the state. We have 10 local workforce boards, and if you talk to each one, you say, are you responsible? They're primarily private sector boards to connect individuals to work. Are you primary responsible, or is the state primary responsible? And no one was really quite sure, and afraid, quite in many cases, afraid to move for fear the state would say, oh no, don't do that. And we've tried to remove that ambiguity, and we're starting to see these private sector workforce boards around the state respond to their new authority to meet the workforce needs in their region, and the state being a resource, a help for them as they move ahead. So I feel like we've made good progress, started a good trajectory on those 2 items. The third item, though, actually my number 1 item, is closing the achievement gap in Kentucky. And I will tell you, we have made absolutely 0 progress in that area. And if any of these 3 is a moral imperative, that one is. When the NAEP testing just came out, and you see that in our elementary and middle schools, that we've had an additional 16,000 students around the state drop out of the category of either mastery or partial mastery of skills in reading and math down into a category that says has no mastery, not even a partial mastery of reading and math. Even though our state average is staying about the same, we're seeing a great divide within our school systems of students, higher performing students moving up higher, holding our average the same, but a lot more students moving down into that category, especially in reading and math in elementary and middle schools, that just do not get it. And I ask you to think about today, what does the future for that student look like in a world that is increasingly technical, that increasingly values education and skills in order to find that dream of supporting yourself and a family and using your abilities to the maximum in the life we have here. So I'm excited about this appointment to the board because that number one goal that there has been no progress, and quite frankly, I feel like we're moving backwards on, the opportunity to work more directly on accomplishing that goal. So thanks again for the opportunity. For the last 2.5 years, it's been a great time.
Don, I asked Don if he wanted to say anything. He said, I don't think so. He just, in fairness to him, we had this conversation in probably the last 24 hours or so, maybe less actually, with respect to his willingness to do this. But as a consummate professional, he said, hey, whatever I can do to help, where I can serve, happy to do it. So any questions specific to this change in leadership and thoughts for Secretary Heiner as well? I have no, my expectation is that they will do literally the very things that Secretary Heiner just spoke to. And that is to look out for what is in the best interest of the future of Kentucky educationally. And there are 11 members, I believe, is that correct, of that board, a number of whom were appointed yesterday. And these are terms that serve, what is the duration of one of those terms? 4 years. So these are rolling 4-year terms. I've made some appointments previously. These are new appointments to the board. As to what I just expect that they will do what is best for Kentucky and do what is best for the educational process here in Kentucky. I'm not a member of that board. Whatever they determine to do, I have confidence in them to make the right decisions.
How much did JCPS play into your decisions on these appointments, and do you have a particular outcome in mind as to how they should?
No, I don't. I mean, I think there's an audit going on right now. My understanding is that an audit of the entire system is happening right now. I think it would be presumptuous to make determinations without having seen that. I'm a big believer in looking at the lay of the land. So my understanding is that that's somewhere in progress, and hopefully toward the end of it. It's been going on for some time. I would hope that that report comes out sometime in the not too distant future. When that comes out, let's look at it and let that be a determinant. With all due respect to JCPS, it's one of a number of systems in the state. And it's the largest, and 15% of our students in Kentucky are in that one system. You know, but sadly, so too are probably 50 to 60% of our failing schools. So clearly, while it's a smaller percentage of the population than it is of the schools that are struggling, this, I think, was the impetus behind the audit in the first place. What is going on and what might we do better? That information, when it comes, should be looked at by the commissioner, should be looked at by the Board of Education, and they should make determinations at that time.
What is your assessment of how the Commissioner Pruitt is doing, your assessment of his job?
I like Commissioner Pruitt. I don't know him super well, but I've gotten to know him fairly well. I've had a lot of interaction with him and meetings with him. I like him as a person, but again, I'm concerned by my 2 cents worth. I'm not happy to see 16,000 more kids falling below a level of proficiency than just 2 years ago. And again, is that one person's responsibility? No. Is that the entire board's responsibility? No. Is it any one school district's responsibility? No. It is a combination of many things, which I think gets back to the whole point of having an audit and understanding what's going on. So, I mean, I don't work for him. He doesn't work directly for me, so I don't have the day-to-day interaction with him, but all of my interaction with him has been pleasant. I mean, I was with him just the other day. He's been involved in a panel where decisions were made as related to workforce development. So as a person, I have nothing but good things to say about him.
With your appointments, you're going to have this entire voting block. If they go to this meeting today and they kick out Pruitt, it's going to appear that that move came from you.
Well, understand this. I mean, when I was elected, 100% of the people on that board were appointed by someone else. If every decision they made would have reflected on that, that's the way this job. I hope you understand that these people get put on boards by people when the time comes up. I'm 2.5 years into this, so this, you know, what they decide to do is entirely their call, and my job is to put the right people on the right boards, this board among others, and then trust them to do the job. Whether it's at this level, at the university level, whether it's, how many different boards, and where's Brett? I mean, we have 400 different boards and commissions that I appoint people to.
And I guess my question, I'll clarify, is to make that move, if they make that move today, we know they're going to go into a personnel behind closed doors. But if they make that move today in their first meeting, does it show that this board has gotten to know Pruitt and been aware of Pruitt?
I hope so. I mean, again, this is the type of responsibility this board has. And the reason, and again, this all predated me. I didn't design the structure. If I were designing the structure of how it would work, that the Commissioner of Education would report to the Secretary of Education, as it does in most states. This state is different, but it's what I inherited in the governor before me and the governor before that. I don't know at what point it was designed this way. But the Commissioner reports to the board, and then the board is independent in large measure of the Cabinet Secretary. Has always been that way. It certainly has been that way since I've been governor. So there's a process. These things unfold a certain way. What they decide to do better be in the best interest of Kentucky and of Kentucky's children and of the ability to make sure that our kids read and do math at grade level, because if they're not doing it in 3rd grade and in 4th and 8th, which is the NAEP scores, I believe, are looking at 4th and 8th is primarily what they focus on. If those NAEP scores, which are really an assessment, the A in there is for the assessment of their progress. What is the National Assessment for Educational Progress? If we are falling back and if we're seeing those for whom they need the most getting the least, boy, I hope that's what they're talking about. If I was on that board, that's what I'd be talking about.
Governor, the legislature did not include a funding mechanism for charter schools. I know you're a big proponent of that. Does
Absolutely.
That derail? Will no charter school be able to open this year or the next year because of that?
I honestly don't know. I mean, my job is not to be in that level of detail. It just isn't. I am a proponent of it because I think competition is healthy. But there's also a process. I don't think anyone had the expectation that schools would be opening immediately. The idea that we would even open the possibility of there being a charter school was to bring opportunity for parents and students to have a choice. And that's important to understand. I mean, a charter school is a public school. It's funded with public school dollars, taught by public school teachers that are required to be certified in the same way that all other public school teachers are. But it comes with less bureaucracy, less red tape sometimes that frees those teachers. And trust me, ask any teacher you know if they would like to be audited a little less, tested a little less, empowered a little more, trusted a little more, to be able to make the decisions that are best for their students. And I think the vast majority of them would say yes, 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 and yes. That's what a charter school authorizes and allows. So I think even now a lot of work is being done to identify where those might best serve people. Where do parents want a choice? Where do children need a better opportunity? It is into those communities, and they would be pretty exclusively in our state, I think, in some of our urban cores. Some of our inner cities where we see most of our failing schools. In those areas, I think work is still being done to identify where charter schools would go. With respect to the funding, I don't know that it changes things that dramatically, but over time, if there's not financial support, it makes it more difficult for them, I would think. But again, there's a lot of different ways in which things get funded. They have other funding sources besides just general assembly appropriations.
Some JCPS board members seem to feel that Commissioner was going to actually, I'm looking here because this is a direct quote from a JCPS board member that said he was going to recommend state assistance, and you did not like that idea. I just wanted to clarify, is that the case?
State assistance as it relates to what?
To
Has he, I didn't realize he'd made a statement as to what his thoughts were.
He hasn't yet. The word is that he was apparently planning to do.
But
that.
so who is this person who has,
This
who's,
is a JCPS board member that would like to remain.
does that board member have a name?
Yes, board member Brady, Chris Brady.
Okay, so Chris Brady knows something that that Commissioner Pruitt has not said publicly to anybody, which is an interesting comment for him to make, because I have no awareness of it, and it would also seem remarkably, back to your question, remarkably premature to make a determination about what should be done when we don't even have the audit. I don't even know where the audit stands. I know it's underway, but I don't think it's even been publicly announced when it's going to be complete. If anybody knows what's in it, it hasn't been publicly made aware to anybody that I'm aware of, except perhaps this board member, that's probably worth looking into. I'm not sure how this person has insight that nobody in this room does.
Governor, social media is what it is, the rumor mill is what it is, but there's this thing floating around on social media that this is all an orchestrated move to basically remove Pruitt and then do a state takeover of JCPS. Can you equivocally say that that is or is not the case?
I can't even begin to state that it is or isn't the case, because I will have zero involvement in this decision. Number one, the odds of that happening before there's an understanding of what's going on with this audit, I would guess, if this board has any competence, and I believe they will, would be about zero. It would be so far getting the cart in front of the horse to make a determination like that before you even have the information. I cannot hypothesize as to what they may or may not do, but here's what I want. I want the same thing that Secretary Heiner wants, which is number one, is to close this achievement gap, to help kids that frankly are not being helped right now. That is the point of the educational process. Whatever method to the madness gets that done, I'd be a proponent of. And I'll have to, again, I trust, just when I put people on boards, I trust them to do the job. You know, pick the board, pick the commission. Some rise to a higher level of attention and more interest to some people. You know, ones that touch more people, like educational boards, tend to be those. But it just, in every one of these instances, I put people in that I think are competent, that are capable of making the right decisions, and I let them go. My approach to management has always been to be hands-off as much as possible, hands-on as much as necessary. The hands-on part of being a governor is to appoint the people who handle the responsibility.
You've talked a lot, and you just mentioned management, and throughout your administration, you talked about running things kind of like a business. And you know, part of leadership is that those who are on the assembly line or those who are digging the ditches trust their leader. The comments that were made on Friday, the follow-up on Sunday has led many, through responses to our coverage, just not trust you when it comes to public education.
Fair enough. They should be happy I'm not on the Board of Education then.
Can you clarify anything you said on Friday, or?
No, I mean, what I've said on Friday and what I said subsequent to that, I think speak for themselves. And literally, and people would say, darn right they do, no matter which way they look at it. What I said Friday was speaking about the impact. I mean, I have more children in public school than the average person in Kentucky does. I'll tell you that. 4 of my children. Most families don't have 4 children in public school. And my children's schools was given with less than 24 hours notice. There is a cost to that. There's an impact to that. When children are left home alone, it's not healthy. That's what I was speaking to. Did I clarify that well? No, I did not. And were a lot of people hurt by that? Yes, they were. And that was the whole point in my follow-up conversation. Because for people who genuinely misunderstood or genuinely understood it as they heard it and were hurt by it and angered by it, I was sincerely and am sincerely apologetic to folks like that. Because I know what I intended to speak to, which was the impact of children being left home alone. I also understand how that was received and heard and how things were conflated. That was not my intent. And in the fact that people were hurt, as I said in my statement, very apologetic and happy to apologize to people like that. I think that's an important thing to understand, and those of you who cover media. When people say things that are inappropriate or wrong or have been misunderstood, the clarification of that should never be something that people shy away from, ever. I won't, nor do I in this instance. So in both cases, what I was trying to say and the fact that it was not understood is why that being said on Friday and my comments on Sunday were stated.
Can you clarify, do you believe that children were put in danger because of schools being out on Friday?
Does anyone in this state, does anyone in this room believe if you leave thousands and thousands of children home alone, with no one watching them, that that's good. Does anybody? We know for a fact that a significant number of these children are on free meals, reduced and free lunch. Children get their meals on Fridays at school, breakfast and lunch. How did those children eat? And a lot of these kids are given meals to bring home on the weekends, and this was a Friday. So did that have an impact? Yes. There's no question about it. You talk to the states where people did have people out for not just a day, but for extended periods of time. I was speaking with a fellow on the radio this morning who covers eastern Kentucky and parts of West Virginia. Many, many people lost their jobs because they just said, I'm going to stay home with my child while the schools are closed. So of course, when children are home alone, if they are, there's the potential for things to go wrong. No question about that. That was the point that I was trying to make. Clearly, I did not communicate it well, which is why I've apologized to the people that were hurt by that. Because there was no intent to conflate the fact that children were put at risk with a specific action by an individual or even a group of individuals, but more the fact that that is an unintended consequence of children being left home alone. Other questions?
Governor, teachers have been watching what you've been saying and doing, and it's no secret that they have expressed that they're upset with you right now. Do you worry that if the commissioner loses his position today, you're going to further upset teachers out there?
Is it possible to further upset teachers from my position at this point? Here, the thing that's interesting is that no governor has ever put more money both into education itself, the actual funding of education, than I have, literally. In absolute dollars, nobody has ever, and including per pupil. So no matter which way you slice it, no governor has ever put as much or more money ever into any category, no matter how you slice it. No governor has ever put as much money into the pension systems, including for teachers. I've literally put more money into the pension system in the first 2.5 years in my first 2 budgets than any governor in history, including the one who preceded me over 8 years, didn't put as much in as I've put in my first 2 budgets. You would think these things would be appreciated. It would cause you to wonder if maybe there's not more to it than that, if they're not. Have I compounded the issue by saying things that have been misunderstood and sometimes saying things that in hindsight I should have used different language? Absolutely, I have. And that's entirely my responsibility. And I take that responsibility. I've said publicly, and I want people to understand this, I do appreciate it. Again, I have 8 children that are in school right now. Half my children are in public school, half my children are in private school, but they're all taught by teachers. My father was a public school teacher. My grandmother was a retired public school teacher, made it her entire career. 2 of my siblings have taught public school. One of my sisters is a teacher even now. These are things that, again, I'm surrounded by this. I have been. A significant portion of my immediate family have been in front of the classroom. So it is not out of lack of appreciation. Clearly, it's my responsibility to be more sensitive to the words that I use and to be more intentional and more thoughtful in the language itself. I realize that. So a lot of people have been hurt. It is to those people who are genuinely hurt that I apologize. But to the heart of your question, is any decision that's made have the potential to exacerbate things? Of course it is, including things that I don't have any involvement in. That's a possibility. But that's also the nature of this job. It really is. It's interesting, Aristotle's not someone who gets quoted often, but while a number of people have had this attributed to them, he most often has said, if you want to avoid any criticism, say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing. That's not acceptable for Kentucky. I want Kentucky to say things, do things, and be something better than it is. I want to see achievement gaps closing. I want to see young people aspiring to greater things and be given greater opportunity. I want children who don't have opportunity now to be given that opportunity. And that will sometimes result in changing things. You've heard it said, the definition of insanity, keep doing the same thing over and over and expect different results. We deserve better than that, and that's really what we're trying to do. My job in this role is to be a point person for many things. There's always going to be resistance. It puts extra emphasis on me making sure that I'm more delicate in situations than I have sometimes been. It's not my natural nature, as some of you have seen. I tend to be a person with a sense of urgency. I tend to be a person who wants to see the right thing get done. But at the end of the day, as I said in my commentary the other day, we are all in this together. We really are. At the end of the day, what happens to the most successful student and to the least successful student have a direct impact on every single person in this room, every single person watching these broadcasts, because we're all in this boat together. And when one succeeds, we all have reason to celebrate. And when one fails, we have all reason to be concerned. And my responsibility is to make sure we do as much for all as we possibly can.
Do you worry, though, that one step after another is just going to anger teachers to the point that they're going to continue protesting and they're going to continue
No,
taking
I'm not.
from work?
No, because here's what I know. There's 75,000 teachers right now, roughly, that are still teaching. The vast majority of them, as in all but a few, genuinely want what's best for the child. Genuinely. So they want to do, you think they're not concerned by the idea that a child may not have been fed, that a child may have been left alone, that a child's safety might have been compromised? Of course. Do you think they care when achievement gaps widen? Of course they do. Especially if it happens to be for children that they're pouring their hearts into and their lives into. Of course they do. So I don't worry about that, because if I were to worry about that, it would be to say that I don't think teachers care about what's best for children, but I know they do. They do care about what's best for children. And a teacher who cares about what's best for a child knows that the best way to help that child is to be with that child, educating them, as is their job, as is their profession, as is their calling. That's the whole point of it. So that's why I don't worry about it at all, because the teachers I know who are in the classroom love to be in the classroom.
I have a question for Secretary Hines.
Sure.
And Governor, you can stick around if you like.
No, I mean, go ahead.
You and I have spoken in the last few weeks at the Capitol about what, your future and how things go, and we know that the two of you both have a political history. Anything about maybe getting back into politics, even though you're concerned with
Thanks for that question.
I can answer that for you based on conversations we've had for the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's really simple. I'm cooked, and politically. So no, I've talked to my wife. She'll reinforce it, but absolutely not. I'll tell you, my life, really my civic life, my greatest civic passion by far are for kids in the K-12 system. There are ways that we can reach each of those children, and I've seen I've seen where kids that a lot of the world would expect would have an academic bell curve here with proper frameworks. Those bell curves move just right on top of the higher performing kids. And that's what's driven me civically, really the reason I've gotten in races, and this opportunity here in the cabinet, and certainly this new opportunity as well, allow me to work in an area of my greatest civic passion. So I'm thrilled with the opportunity.
You talked about the failure to narrow that achievement gap. Why is that? What's going on? Why do you think that's a tough nut to crack, in your opinion?
We'll get, obviously, we could spend all day on that. I will tell you that where I've seen that gap narrow and narrow rapidly is when the presumption that every child can learn from 8 to 2:30, can all learn the same, when that presumption goes out the window and you start providing the holistic wraparound supports for that child, whatever might be missing. It might be filling teeth, it might be help with homework, a whole host of services. Some of the best frameworks around the country involve catch-up time, 24, 48-hour intervention for a child that's missing a piece of that education that results in sort of a Swiss cheese education that doesn't allow them to be successful in later grades. And quite frankly, these efforts are taking place. We have a lot of bright spots in Kentucky right now in education. You look over here and they've got a really great plan, and over here a great plan, and over here a great plan. And my hope is that those bright spots, those great ideas, we find some way to replicate that across the state in the future. But we have I think the greatest moral imperative we have as adults is to prepare this next generation to take over. And I think as adults in a society, we're doing a pretty good job with at least a majority of the kids. But our imperative is for every child.
What is your assessment of the job that Commissioner Pruitt is doing?
I'm hoping that we can move faster in the state. That's been my hope when I came here from the beginning.
Will you push to lead the board? Will you push to have Pruitt removed?
I haven't been to the first meeting yet, and I can't really presume what would happen or not happen.
Do you understand why some people see this as a telegraph move to put you in charge of that board, knowing your leadership here, and bringing you to a board that some people think needs a little better leadership?
Well, I think there needs to be a fundamental understanding, and people, quite frankly, confuse this often. And they think, well, he's been Secretary of the Education and Workforce Cabinet and has some ability to direct the path. That is not true. We have been encouragers, and at board meetings to move and especially focus on the needs of kids that just aren't that don't even have partial mastery of skills. And as education, there has been no direct involvement, with KDE other than as an encourager. So that's what I'm excited about, is being able to serve on this board and be one of 11 in decisions going forward.
What about JCPS? Do you have an idea of what should be done there via the board?
Yeah, I think the governor talked about everyone in the room. I haven't been privy to any of the audit, not one piece, and so that I was surprised when I heard someone outside KDE say that they know the result or something, when even in discussions with the commissioner, absolutely none of the audit has been released, to my knowledge, to anybody other than to the pieces that are complete to him. But okay, thanks.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thanks. Good job. Thanks, guys.